Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerantz. We are joined by Robbin Itkin. She's an attorney with Steptoe & Johnson, an international law firm. She specializes in bankruptcy law. As you know, I used to be a lawyer, and I went to law school in Washington, D.C., and Steptoe is based in Washington, D.C., so I know the firm well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So for better or for worse, we need to have you on the program because we've seen a wave of municipal bankruptcies. I want to start with California, if we may, and then I want to move on to what's happening in Michigan. In California, the bankruptcies are?
Well, we've had several.
Right.
We've had several, starting with Orange County in '91.
Oh, yes.
And then going to Vallejo in 2008.
Oh, yes.
And we have Stockton and the big San Bernardino in 2012, and we have a couple smaller ones in between.
And I think that it was the San Bernardino and Stockton bankruptcies that really caused shockwaves to just flutter through not only California, but the entire nation. From your eyes, as a bankruptcy lawyer, as a restructuring attorney, what happened?
Well, what happened is not so unusual as to what's happening in every city and in a lot of different states, and that is the staggering unfunded pensions, the loss of tax revenues. You know, when property taxes go down because of property values, they're not collected as the high amount. State sales taxes when people can't afford to buy a lot of things. So you've got increasing obligations and increasing and decreasing revenues.
But I want to talk about the pension obligations. And when I say pension, I also include retiree health care as well. There's no doubt that in 2000, the bargaining partners on the public employee side did quite well in terms of increasing their benefit packages. That being said, there is an argument that if you work for a public entity, you may make less money than your private counterparts, and the flip side of that is you're able to get benefits that are superior to your private counterparts. What's your sense of that?
Well, I think that's always been the argument, but I think what's happened now a lot is that you have the city employees making more money than you do private employees
in the private
sectors, and that's the big rub. I mean, the difficulty is to take away anything from somebody once they've planned on it. I mean, you work knowing that you're going to get these pensions, believing you're going to get these pensions, and it's very difficult when these problems occur and they have to be cut.
Now, I have to ask you this. We know that if a municipality wants to change its pension formula, they can do so for new employees on a go-forward basis.
Yes.
The question is, can they do so for existing employees on a go-forward basis?
For existing employees, yes, you can. Well, you can do it through a bankruptcy, and that's why people are going to bankruptcy.
Exactly.
And because also, no one wants to give in informal discussions. No one wants to set a precedent. So unfortunately or fortunately, a bankruptcy brings everybody in one venue to negotiate these things.
But what happens to these individuals who've been working for San Bernardino for 40 years, and all of a sudden their pension, I mean, it's like Enron Part 2.
Absolutely.
But you would never expect a city to suffer that.
No, but San Bernardino owes over $1 billion. That's their debt. And they can't pay it. They couldn't pay payroll. That's where they had to file. And it's going to affect the wealth and the welfare of all their citizens, so you have to take some cuts.
And so pension obligations are dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Well, they're not dischargeable, that you can cut them and you can change them, and then you pay them out over time. And it's a different mechanism. I mean, Vallejo still has, I think, about $135 million it came out of bankruptcy with. These obligations. If you look at Stockton, Vallejo, San Bernardino, when they file their list of creditors, the top ones are pensions and retirements, over $100 million. So they have to cut them, and then they pay what's there over time.
And then there's Detroit.
Yes, Detroit.
I think it's the 7th largest city in the country. It was at one time a crown jewel in our nation. When you think about the music industry, the automobile industry, it grew out of Detroit. I understand the Detroit suburbs are still thriving, but yet the city of Detroit is a shell of its former self. What can you tell us about that city and its municipal bankruptcy?
Well, what I understand is that city had there's so many housing developments that are empty. They had problems because they couldn't afford, they had an unbalanced budget. They couldn't pay, they would have, when police would go out, it would take over 50 minutes to respond to a call. The average in the nation's around 11. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but the problem with that is they had $3.5 billion in unfunded pensions, as included in their a little short of $20 billion in their debt, but Los Angeles exceeds those amounts.
Okay,
eightfold.
well, let's talk about Los Angeles, because we know that as other cities in the state have started to see their budgets be in the black, not so for Los Angeles. Still struggling. As you know, recently there was an agreement between Los Angeles and its largest public union partner, the DWP union. What's your sense of what's happening in LA?
It's tough. It's very tough. I mean, the pension obligations, the unfunded pension obligations in Los Angeles are about $25 billion and above. That's more than the entire debt that Detroit has in its bankruptcy. It's comprised of fire and police pensions, the water and power employees.
Right. Well, one could argue that that mayoral race was decided because the DWP union supported the losing candidate.
Right.
Is
well,
that
that's
fair?
what was said. That was said. I don't know if that's really accurate.
Right.
But both of the mayoral candidates talked about how bad things were in the city, how we have to do something with these pensions, and you have fire trucks that have old navigation systems that need to be updated. So our health and welfare is being affected as well.
So during the recent downturn in the entire state of California, we actually heard rumblings maybe California should declare bankruptcy, the entire state of California.
Well, it can't.
Go.
Because it's not
Go.
a municipality. Okay.
Go.
The complexity is under Chapter 9 of the Bankruptcy Code, you have to be a municipality. A municipality is a city, a county. It's a township. It's not a state. So the state can't. Every city in the state could potentially, but California allows bankruptcies to be filed if there's a mediation that takes place first. It's really to be the last resort, the bankruptcy. There's a 60 to 90-day mediation that's confidential, or you're facing an immediate fiscal crisis.
So I have to ask you, do you believe that we will see more municipal bankruptcies in California, part 1, part 2, in the nation?
In my humble opinion, I do think there will be more, because I think that people, the whole point is to try to negotiate, and that's what Chapter 9 and the state law requires, to negotiate first before you would have to file as a last resort. But people aren't giving because they're not in that form that's forcing them to take a cut.
Even though the economy's turning around?
Well, you would think that, but people don't like to set precedents. The unions don't like to set precedents by giving in. But people have to think about, when these bankruptcies are so expensive, Vallejo, the fees were over $13 million.
Who makes that money?
The lawyers.
I want to ask you one other thing. It may be outside of your bailiwick, but I have a sense that you'll be able to answer this. You may have heard, and I'm sure you know, about the mortgage crises throughout the state of California. And certain cities, including San Bernardino County, had looked at having municipal governments take the mortgages by eminent domain.
Right.
Richmond in Contra Costa County is looking to do that.
I mean, there's so many issues.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's so many issues with that, because and also Obama's trying to pass these laws and help people keep their houses and not have foreclosures when they're bankruptcy in Chapter 13. They can't do it. So it's a mess, but that's a huge problem, because it would be good citizens who pay their mortgages but needed to work something out. We're told they could not work it out unless they defaulted. So you were
that happens all the time.
It happens all the time. So people are forced to default and then they lose
Are mortgages dischargeable in bankruptcy?
Not, they're secured. Mortgages are secured by the property, so you can't discharge them.
But is there a homestead exemption?
There's homestead exemptions.
I'm harkening back to my law school days.
Certain states have homestead exemptions.
California?
Yes, but that's, you just get to keep $100,000, $150,000 or something. If your house is worth,
$500,000.
$500,000, yeah. So I mean, it's not a whole lot for somebody, because you'll lose your house. But there are laws and there are negotiations taking place now to try to change this, because people are losing their homes left and right. And when a renegotiation could take place.
It is absolutely complex and complicated, but fortunately, Robbin Itkin can march her way through it. She's a lawyer at Steptoe & Johnson. My name is Brad Palmer. So we'll be right back with Gary DeLong, who's a member of the Long Beach City Council.
Thank you.